Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. Look, in my early parents' time on the farm, rural electrification was being done, and done pretty successfully, although, you know, it had some problems. There was the same old stuff. The investor-owned utilities didn't want co-ops to come in, and it's interesting that nonetheless they got the job done, and rural electrification happened. And quite frankly, rural America was allowed to grow and expand, and I think the same kind of parallels could be drawn with broadband. I think you would all agree that the maps are inaccurate. Are they inaccurate just because some of the companies overstate their coverage to keep subsidized companies out? Or is there another agenda there? Go ahead, Mr. Donovan, or anybody else that wants to.
Sure. So a primary flaw is that the parameters that the FCC asks carriers to report data are overstated, so that carriers can report data that is both correct in terms of what the FCC asked for, as well as not useful for what you or I would consider to be reliable.
Okay, so but why would they report data that's inaccurate? Why would the carriers do that? You can be honest. It stays in this room.
So smaller carriers, serving these rural areas, it's their neighbors that they're serving. If you overstate your coverage, you're going to hear about it, and that's why small carriers have pushed to have more accurate and tighter parameters included in the process.
Well, I would just say this. I mean, I guess it's my thought is probably has something to do with competition, and people see an area and they don't want somebody else moving into it, whether it's got service or not. They might move into it someday. I may be oversimplifying it, but in the end, in rural areas, if we're going to move into the 21st century, this is pretty basic stuff, as electricity was in the 1940s. So this is pretty basic 21st century economy. And so I mean, whose responsibility should it be for verifying the accuracy of the data? Is it the regulator, the consumer, the competitors, the third parties? Who's primarily responsible for verifying the accuracy? Because we're going to have men here next week and just tear them apart.
So the FCC does have an enforcement investigation going on right now.
So would you say that the primary people that
right now, yes. Yeah, right now the regulator is in charge of verification there. The carriers verify that it's correct.
Yep.
I think the bigger question that's been raised for the hearing today is whether they're asking the right questions.
Yeah, well, I'm a farmer. I'm not part of the FCC. It seemed to me that's their job to ask the right questions. Wouldn't it seem to you that? I mean, we're not talking about putting a man on the moon here, right?
No, if I could, Senator, it is true that the FCC reposes authority to verify the data that it is required and asks for carriers through its 477 process. But again, there have been advancements that we are integrating into our broadband mapping initiative that allow for broader verification beyond the FCC, but through crowdsourcing mechanisms, through allowing once a map is actually finally scaled for consumers to actually go in and verify adequacy of the data, the migration of the data to new circumstances, and create feedback loops so that consumers, through crowdsourcing and through direct access to the database, actually can become part of the solution.
So they could give feedback back to the FCC to make sure that the decisions that are being made are accurate?
And the accuracy of the underlying map itself.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Mr. Donovan, I just got about 50 seconds left, but a couple months ago your boss sat before this committee. I asked him what we need to do, what your members need to do to address the Huawei issue. He said that they need direction from authorities. 2 months later it's been. Have you received any direction from authorities?
We are in the process of having continued discussions with some of your colleagues as well as some of the intelligence community to make sure that carriers have the information that they need.
So where are you at in that process without giving away any classified information? Or are you to a point where the decision is going to be made as to what's happening there or what? Look, I'm not on Intel, I'm not on Armed Services, I'm not on Foreign Affairs, but this doesn't smell quite right to me. And so if there's a problem, we need to get the folks in the room who know what the problem is, and we need to make a decision to either get this equipment out or not worry about it anymore. Are we close to that?
I think we are, sir. One of the challenges that we still have is identifying exactly what needs to come out and making sure that carriers in these rural areas have the resources necessary to do so.
All right, well, we look forward to your input on that, and I know we'll get it moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, guys.